Você que está ouvindo esse podcast vive no trânsito entre uma reunião e outra, só um carro poderá te dar a segurança que precisa. O Volkswagen Taos. O SUVW com nota máxima em segurança e com sensor de ponto cego, assistente de faixa e muitos outros poderes. Taos, um carro com superpoderes.
Quer desenvolver os talentos da sua equipe e potencializar os resultados da sua empresa? Conte com a expertise do atendimento corporativo do Senac São Paulo, que já capacitou mais de 1 milhão de pessoas e profissionais de instituições públicas, privadas e terceiro setor. Construa uma equipe altamente motivada e capacitada e destaque-se no mercado. Entre em contato, acesse sp.senac.br/corporativo e saiba mais. Quer saber? Senac.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, attorney and former deputy assistant to President Trump, May Mailman.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, May, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing so good that it would take the Lord Almighty to stop me today from being on. Did I just do that? Oh, my God, how embarrassing. Anyway, as I mentioned on the regular show, there is a bunch that we didn't get to because the Supreme Court, I was saying to Jay last week, it seemed like this was the biggest flurry of end-of-term case I can recall, really, in forever since I've been following the court. And that's a lot of years. And so it's been tough to keep up with it. And there were some things from last week that we didn't get a chance to get to. I thought it was important to take some time because I see those hot takes and oftentimes they're fairly worthless. And now we've had a little more time to think about these things and to actually read the opinions. What a radical thing to do, right? But there are some important things here. And one of those that we wanted to talk about was Grants Pass versus Johnson. And so in this case, the court considered whether enforcing a generally applicable law that regulates camping on public property constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, which should be prohibited by the Eighth Amendment. And back in 2019, there's a case, Martin versus City of Boise. The Ninth Circuit held that these laws were an Eighth Amendment violation unless the person accused of violating the law had access to adequate temporary shelter. And this conflicted with a decision by I believe the 11th Circuit. And generally speaking, a circuit split on an important public policy issue is the sort of thing that gets the Supreme Court's attention. And this is definitely this sort of issue because a number of cities, particularly in the West, have really struggled to find a way to deal with this significant and growing problem of homeless encampments. And so you get to this decision 6-3, along ideological lines that one might expect. The court held that these laws weren't in violation of the Eighth Amendment. And writing for the majority, Justice Gorsuch said that the Eighth Amendment focuses on the kind of punishment a government may impose after a criminal conviction and not on whether governments can criminalize certain behaviors in the first case. And even if one were to accept that the Eighth Amendment applies here, the majority argues that the punishment that's imposed by Grants Pass isn't cruel and unusual. Number one, because if we look at the cruel part, it's not intended to superadd terror, pain, or disgrace, which the court has previously held to be basically the criteria for a cruel punishment. And neither is it unusual because, of course, many jurisdictions have similar laws on the books. Now, in the dissent, which is authored by Justice Sotomayor, joined by Kagan and Jackson, it starts by pointing out the really immense challenges that are created by the homeless problem, and that the argument basically is that laws like the one in Grants Pass punish people not for their behavior, but for their status. And they argue that, well, that's not okay, because in 1962 in Robinson versus California, the court said that punishing someone because of their status is, in fact, an Eighth Amendment violation. In that case, there was a California law that punished people that criminalized being a drug addict, basically. Now, the dissenters say, well, the majority acknowledges Robinson, but it incorrectly applies it. They say the majority is plainly wrong here. And they point to the legislative record saying, hey, the intent by Grants Pass was clearly to criminalize a status, because the ordinance that they look at that defines these prohibited campsites as any place where bedding, sleeping, or other material used for bedding purposes is placed for the purpose of maintaining a temporary place to live. And that targets, the dissenters say, only homeless people, not someone who, has a home and decides they want to spend a night under the stars or something like that. And so in the end, the dissenters say, under the majority's logic, cities cannot criminalize the status of being homeless, but they can criminalize the conduct that defines that status, and that the Constitution cannot be evaded by such formalistic distinctions. So, May, what did you think about this decision?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Nobody's saying that you have to criminalize homelessness. Basically, this is up to individual cities, individual states. The question is whether the Eighth Amendment and its prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment forbids cities from being able to outlaw homeless encampments. And I don't, even under you can't, criminalize someone's status, I just don't see how the Eighth Amendment forbids cities and states from doing that. And like I said, I really do think that the police power should reside with cities and states in order to create safe communities. And by stripping out the power of cities and states to do very basic things like address homelessness, I think that they do our communities a disservice. So, yeah, does the criminalization of homeless encampments criminalize someone's status? Justice Gorsuch says no, because it's not your status necessarily. Like, you're not saying, oh, you're a bum, therefore you go to jail. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be a college student who just feels like camping out in the middle of the park over the summer for fun. Like, you could be a protester, a Occupy Wall Streeter. You could be a bum, you could be a lot of things, but it's not your status. It is, you cannot set up a homeless encampment here. And I think that's, whether or not you like those laws, you don't have to have them, but should they be constitutional? Yeah.
Você que está aqui ouvindo o seu podcast, é empreendedor ou tem o sonho de ter seu próprio negócio de sucesso? Então, prepare-se para uma jornada inspiradora com o podcast Negócio de Sucesso da GetNet. Sob o comando da atriz e empreendedora Maria Gal, você vai mergulhar em histórias de empreendedores de diferentes segmentos e regiões do país que certamente vão dar dicas para impulsionar o seu negócio ou ajudar você a realizar o sonho de empreender. Acompanhe os episódios quinzenalmente às 10 horas. O sucesso espera por você.
I'm torn, and I guess I've gone back and forth on this. What I've learned, I guess I'm going to really pull back on this and saying, what really strikes me is that when I have the time, when we're not like, this was a couple weeks ago, so I've had a little more time to read all the commentary, but more than that, to read the decision, to read the concurrence, to read the dissents. And what I find myself, when I have that amount of time, it's almost always the case where I find that almost everyone has at least some sort of a good argument when I try to approach it with sort of an open mind. So I'm really torn on this because on one hand, I think that the dissenters are right in that as the Grants Pass ordinance is written, I believe it does target a status. Reasonable people can disagree, but I think there's also a way to write that ordinance in a way that doesn't target a status. And so I think that they're right in regards to this particular ordinance, that it in its effect is targeting a status. but it doesn't necessarily have to. It could be rewritten in such a way. But then I thought, well, okay, let's go back to Robinson, right? And Robinson, this goes back quite a ways. Can a status be criminalized? Well, if you follow the court's precedent, no, it can't. And the majority here is saying, well, we're following Robinson, and it doesn't apply here because we're not talking about a status. The dissenters are saying, no, actually it does. I think the dissenters are right here. But then I read Justice Thomas's concurrence. And Justice Thomas, as usual, like I said, there's Clarence off on his own. He says, well, wait a second. Let's look at Robinson. And Robinson was wrongly decided. He says, well, point to me where in the Eighth Amendment it says that laws can't be passed that criminalize the status. Where does it, how do you get that from the text of the Eighth Amendment? And I got to say, when I thought about that argument, I was like, well, damn, I got to say, he's got something here. And I think that the more sort of intellectually consistent, logical position for the majority to take would have been to say, hey, you know what? Robinson was wrongly decided. This is, in fact, criminalizing a status. And while that might be a horrible thing to do, while we might not like it as a matter of public policy, we don't see how this is an Eighth Amendment violation. Maybe you could make an argument for some kind of weird, a due process, equal protection sort of thing. I don't know. But Eighth Amendment, I got to say, I'm with Clarence Thomas on this one.
Yeah. So Robinson, you can't criminalize status under the Eighth Amendment. A 1962 decision. This is like the Wild West Supreme Court years of just whatever you would like to see the world as, you as a Supreme Court justice can find the law for that. But yeah, I do think that there's something logically consistent about, all right, what do we not like about the Eighth Amendment jurisprudence? It seems to be that it's just completely made up. Let's go ahead and overturn Robinson. But as you know, with the exception of Justice Thomas, part of being a conservative justice is, not going further than you're asked to go, having stability in the law. So there is that. But I also thought it was a little bit interesting. So Justice Sotomayor would say that you can get rid of this ordinance and still address the things that you need to address by criminalizing public urination, right, criminalizing littering. You can criminalize all the things that you don't like about public camping, but you just can't criminalize, public camping itself type of thing. But does that even make sense? I mean, if you are actually homeless and you of course that you're going to be littering. Those are your things. Of course you're going to be urinating in public unless the city has to provide toilets and bathrooms. So even I think the dissent, you can just criminalize all these other things and that'll be fine. A, that's a policy choice, and then B, it doesn't make sense to me unless it makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, I think especially on the whole public urination, defecation sort of thing, when we're talking about these, sometimes significantly sized homeless encampments. So the littering thing, okay, maybe you can get around. That's easy for a city to do, right? To say, well, we'll just put some trash cans here or dumpsters or something. But that part of it is difficult. And so yeah, I think that it doesn't necessarily, I had a problem with that. I guess I'll also say that I feel like Justice Gorsuch kind of, and the majority sort of walked up to the point where Justice Thomas was, right? Saying that, hey, the Eighth Amendment wasn't intended for that, but we're going to just say, let's say that it is, right? So I feel like they lost their nerve in a way. And I get the conservative argument there saying that, well, we didn't need to address Robinson to resolve this case. And I think there's something to be said for that. I got to say, it's got to be deeply frustrating to be Clarence Thomas on this court, right? Because he knows he's right and he knows they're with him in spirit, But the pragmatic conservatives, I'll call them, just don't want to go that far. And I get that. But more deeply than that, I'm just generally concerned when people sort of try to take what I think are public policy decisions and make them constitutional issues. And I see that a lot, I guess, on both sides of things. And this is, I think that good public policy should find a way to address homelessness that doesn't involve, in a sense, just pushing them along, right? By saying, you can't be here. Well, we don't have a spot for you, but just figure it out yourselves. I think that's horrible public policy. I think that's inhumane. I think that's cruel, but I don't think it's unconstitutional. And so I think we need to deal with this problem in a way that doesn't necessarily make the courts the arbiter of it, but demands of our public officials, our elected officials, that they take some sort of substantive action. And I don't see that happening. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,